Thinking Fast and Slow is a groundbreaking book by psychologist and Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, where he explores how humans think, make decisions, and the biases that influence us. Kahneman introduces the concept of two distinct modes of thinking: System 1, fast thinking, and System 2, slow thinking. System 1, fast thinking. This is the automatic, fast, and intuitive way of thinking. It operates effortlessly, quickly, and without conscious thought. It relies on heuristics, mental shortcuts that help make quick decisions based on past experiences or general rules of thumb. System 2, slow thinking. This system is more deliberate, analytical, and logical. It requires conscious effort and attention. System 2 is engaged when we need to reason, make complex decisions, or solve difficult problems. Kahneman's central thesis is that while System 1 is often very effective and efficient, it can lead to cognitive biases, errors, and irrational decisions, especially when we rely on it in situations that require more careful thought. Kahneman introduces the two systems by explaining that our mental lives are dominated by these two modes of thinking. System 1 operates automatically and quickly, often drawing on experience and intuition, while System 2 is more deliberate and requires effortful thought. The interaction between these two systems influences almost everything we do. The book highlights that System 2 thinking requires significant mental effort. For example, performing a simple arithmetic problem, like 17 times 24, demands more of our attention than recognizing the answer to a straightforward question. Since System 2 thinking is effortful, we often default to System 1, even in situations where it may not be the best choice. Kahneman explains that System 2 is lazy, in the sense that it tends to avoid engaging whenever possible. Instead, it relies on the quick and easy judgments of System 1. This reliance on System 1 can be problematic because it results in cognitive biases and errors in judgment that may not be immediately apparent. Part 2, Heuristics and Biases. Kahneman dedicates a significant portion of the book to explaining various cognitive biases and heuristics, mental shortcuts or rules of thumb, that humans use when making judgments. Chapter 4, The Associative Machine. System 1 is an associative machine, meaning it automatically links things together based on past experiences or patterns. It uses associative memory, which connects pieces of information to create impressions or judgments, often without us realizing it. While this is efficient, it can also lead to errors, especially when the associations are not accurate or relevant. Chapter 5, Cognitive Ease. System 1 operates on the principle of cognitive ease, meaning that it favors ideas and judgments that feel familiar or easy to process. The more easily something comes to mind, the more likely it is that we will accept it as true or correct. Cognitive ease can lead to overconfidence, making us susceptible to illusions of truth and errors in judgment. Chapter 6, Substitution. System 1 often simplifies complex questions by substituting them with easier ones. For example, if you are asked, "How happy are you with your life?" you may subconsciously substitute this difficult question with a simpler one like, "How happy am I today?" This can lead to biased answers and faulty decision-making, especially when the simplified question doesn't accurately reflect the original one. Chapter 7, Anchoring. One of the most famous cognitive biases discussed in the book is anchoring. This occurs when people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they receive, the anchor, to make subsequent judgments. For example, if you are first shown a high price for an item and then a lower price, the lower price might seem like a great deal, even if it's still higher than the actual value of the item. Chapter 8, Availability Heuristic. The availability heuristic is when people judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily examples come to mind. If you've recently seen news reports about plane crashes, you might overestimate the danger of flying, even though statistically flying is much safer than driving. Chapter 9, Representativeness Heuristic. Kahneman explains the representativeness heuristic, where people judge the probability of an event by how similar it is to a prototype or stereotype. For example, if someone is described as quiet, introspective, and loves to read, we might assume they are more likely to be a librarian than a salesperson, even though there are more salespeople than librarians in the population. Kahneman explores how overconfidence can distort our judgment. Hindsight bias makes people believe that events were more predictable than they actually were. Overconfidence bias leads individuals to overestimate their own abilities or the accuracy of their predictions. These biases often result in poor decision-making, particularly in fields like finance, where people tend to believe they can predict outcomes better than they can. The illusion of validity refers to the tendency for people to overestimate the accuracy of their judgments, particularly when they have a high level of confidence in their knowledge or expertise. Kahneman uses the example of stock market analysts and their predictions to demonstrate how people, despite having limited information, tend to be overly confident about their forecasts. This chapter delves into the tension between intuitive thinking, System 1, and rational reasoning, System 2. Kahneman argues that while intuition can sometimes be useful, it can also be dangerously wrong. He suggests that experts, particularly in domains like medicine or finance, often rely on intuition inappropriately, even when data should lead them to a different conclusion. Part 4. Choices. Kahneman discusses decision-making processes and how we often fail to make rational choices, even in situations where we have all the necessary information. Chapter 13. Prospect Theory. Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky developed prospect theory, which shows that people tend to value gains and losses differently, leading to decisions that are not always rational. People are generally more sensitive to potential losses than to equivalent gains, loss aversion, which explains why they might make risky decisions to avoid losses rather than to achieve gains. Chapter 14. Loss aversion. Loss aversion is the idea that the pain of losing something is psychologically more powerful than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. This can lead people to make irrational decisions, such as holding on to losing investments for too long or refusing to sell at a loss. Chapter 15. Endowment Effect. The endowment effect is a bias that occurs when people place a higher value on things merely because they own them. Kahneman describes how this bias leads people to overvalue possessions and make suboptimal choices, such as overpricing their own property when selling it. Kahneman introduces the concept of the experiencing self and the remembering self to explain how our perceptions of happiness and satisfaction are shaped. The experiencing self is the part of us that lives in the present moment, whereas the remembering self reflects on past experiences. Kahneman explains that the remembering self tends to dominate our overall life satisfaction because we judge our lives based on memories rather than the actual experiences we have. Kahneman explains that people often neglect the duration of an experience when recalling it. Instead, they tend to judge an experience based on how it ended, the peak-end rule, and its most intense moments, rather than the entire experience. This leads to distorted memories of events and can affect decision-making about future experiences. In the final chapters, Kahneman reflects on the implications of his findings for our understanding of human rationality. He acknowledges that human decision-making is not as rational as traditional economic models would suggest, and that much of our behavior is influenced by biases and heuristics. While recognizing the incredible adaptability of System 1 thinking, Kahneman urges for greater awareness of these cognitive pitfalls and the importance of engaging System 2 when making important decisions. In Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman provides a comprehensive look at the cognitive biases, heuristics, and errors in judgment that shape our thinking. By understanding how we think, how we make decisions, and the mental shortcuts we take, we can begin to mitigate the effects of these biases and make better choices in our personal, professional, and social lives. The book is both a practical guide to understanding human behavior and a philosophical reflection on the nature of human rationality.